The new MacBook Airs are here, but if you're thinking about buying one, stop and listen to these important tips so that you don't make a big mistake, because there are way more differences than you think. We finally have the new M3 chip in these ultra thin and lightweight machines, and for a lot of people, that is gonna be really helpful. Now, Apple actually went and discontinued the M2 15-inch MacBook Air that was available for $1,300, and now you can only buy the M3. But if you don't care about extra performance, you can actually pick one up for $1,000 brand new. We'll leave the link down below, and that is an incredible value. Now, the M1 MacBook Air that we have all loved so much is finally gone, unfortunately, but the good news is the M2 model is now $999. But for $100 more, you can buy the M3, so is that worth it? Well, the first difference comes with the midnight color. I love this dark blue hue, but it is a fingerprint magnet, and thankfully Apple has now updated it with new anodization with anti-fingerprint coatings, just like the Space Black MacBook. So I think that is gonna be a nice improvement. Now, the second change that we were not expecting is that it has a new microphone setup. We now have different microphone modes, one that has voice isolation along with enhanced quality for voice. So there's a lot of extra processing going on, just like we have on an iPhone. So if you're in a noisy environment, it's gonna do a better job at picking up your voice. And the next one is the new Wi-Fi 6E built in. Now you might say that you don't have a new Wi-Fi 6E router, but even with an older one, the M3 version, instead of supporting 1200 megabit per second, it actually goes up to 2400. So even with an older router, I saw much better speeds with a Wi-Fi 6E MacBook. And with that, if you have areas of your house or your yard where the signal is low, it's actually a lot better in terms of reception, which is really nice. Now with that, we have that new powerful 3nm M3 chip, but before I want to talk about the performance differences and if it's worth it, I have to talk about the different sizes with the MacBooks, because both these MacBooks are fanless, and because of that, heat can get built up inside of them and they can start to slow down. And when we compared the 13-inch to the 15-inch, we saw that the 15-inch with the same chip gets better performance, and it holds on to that performance much longer because of its larger size, more metal, and it can cool itself off better. Now, of course, we have the larger display as well, and when you're using these, 13 and 15 might not sound like a big difference, but the screen real estate is so nice. So if you do things like photo, video editing, or other things, it is really nice to have the extra size of the display. And as far as weight and thinness, you don't really notice that difference. But of course, if you don't care about performance for longer, tougher tasks, having something so small is nice. Now, another difference between them is if you're buying the base M3 version, you don't get the same amount of graphics cores. You get 8 instead of 10, whereas on the 15-inch, even the $1299 price comes with 10 graphics cores, so that already boosts up your performance without having to spend an extra $100 to increase it. And now let's talk about the CPU performance. In single core, you see we have a massive boost in performance, way bigger than what we got going from M1 to M2. And in multi-core, we also see a really big difference in performance, all while using the same amount of wattage, which means that you don't get any worse battery life, and with that, you don't get any more heat than you did in the past. Now, as far as graphics performance, if you're just looking at the raw graphics, both 10 cores, the difference is minor. But in real world use, Apple made a lot of changes to the architecture, optimizations, and of course ray tracing, which makes it much faster in certain tasks that can make use of this new technology. So if you're using a lot of productivity software, a lot of it that uses rendering is getting way faster, and an M3 MacBook can actually beat out a machine like the M1 Max, which costs $3,500 and is way thicker and heavier. in some tasks or get very close to it. So the performance difference is really big. Now with that, being 3 nanometer, it also uses less power if you're doing very light tasks, and that can actually increase your battery life by 2, 3, or even 4 hours, which is really nice as well. So I would say that it is worth it spending $100 more to go for the M3 chip instead of getting the M2, which is just a little bit cheaper. The only reason that I would recommend getting an M2 version is if you get a big discount, not $100, but a $300 difference like that 15-inch M2 that I showed off earlier in this video. And now we have to get into some more important buying tips. First, don't think that there's a $200 difference between the 13-inch and the 15-inch because you have to spend an extra $100 just to match up with the 10 graphics cores. And that means that it's only a $100 difference for the bigger battery, the extra speakers that you get in there, and that larger display. Next, don't think that the M3 will always be faster than an M2 machine. If you look at it, both the 13 and the 15-inch come with 8 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of storage. But in the past, we have shown you that starting with the M2, upgrading to 16 gigs of RAM gives you a major performance improvement in productivity tasks. So if you're looking at possibly getting a 16 gig M2 or an 8 gig M3, well, the M2 will actually be faster in tougher tasks that need RAM. So my second point is, if you are gonna look at upgrading, I would say if you can spend the money, get 16 gigs of RAM because it can make a big difference in performance as well as certain slowdowns. Now we're gonna do another RAM comparison. We've done it in the past with the M2s and you guys can check that out to show you real world multitasking use cases as well. And with that, we have 256 gigs of base storage. So you might think an extra $200 gets you just double the capacity, but the 256 gig only comes with one single NAND storage chip instead of 2. And when you have 2, the speeds get much faster, almost twice as fast, just like with the M2 series. And that not only means that transfers will be faster if you're transferring data onto the device, sometimes more than 2-3 times faster, but with that, if you only have 8 gigs of RAM or if you have huge programs, you can have major slowdowns happen because there's just not enough RAM. And with a larger SSD, when you take that RAM and it actually loads programs onto the storage, that actually can really speed up your productivity because your storage speed is twice as fast. So ideally, if you care about performance, and this is what Apple does, they staircase you up to spending more money. Getting a 512 16 gig or at least a 16 gig version of the M3 will have much better performance than a base model. Now, I have to say that not everybody needs this. If you're a regular consumer doing email, some light web apps, media consumption, I would not worry about this too much. But if you can see yourself maybe in the future going up and doing video editing, photo editing, other tougher productivity tasks, that is where you want to spend some extra money to upgrade this, because of course you cannot do it after the fact, and it is going to improve the longevity of your device. And so with that said, if you might find a steal of a deal on an M2 that has upgraded storage and RAM, it can actually be faster than a base model M3. So once again, if you can save a good chunk of money and there's a big difference, I would actually go with an M2 model. And the last difference that nobody was expecting, and this might shape your buying decision, is the fact that the new M3 machines can actually support 2 external displays if you have it in clamshell mode. In the past, all of Apple's base M1, M2, and then M3 chips, they only supported 1 external display, even if you close the lid. But now you can have the internal one plus a display, or close the lid, connect a Bluetooth keyboard and mouse, and have 2 displays. So that could make or break your purchasing decision compared to another Mac. And that is a nice benefit that they added this. So we are gonna be getting these machines and we are gonna be testing the RAM performance, the new SSD performance, if that's changed as far as throttling and the overall differences, not only with the M2 MacBook Airs, but also with the 14-inch M3 Pro. So if you guys wanna see that, make sure you click that subscribe button above. Check out one of those great videos right over there. This has been Max, and I'll see you in the next one.